Hello everyone, my name is Lauren Clarke and I'm an artist, art psychotherapist and a PhD candidate based in the Belfast School of Art at Ulster University. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share my research, which is a project which explores contemporary tattoo culture and how these embodied images offer opportunities to communicate and preserve intangible cultural heritage. This research has a number of aims, but today I will be primarily discussing how reflexive creative practices offer an alternative methodology to researching and archiving the visual imagery and ephemeral cultural insight of tattoos. Additionally, the approach seeks to address the often biased social perception of tattoos in contemporary culture, which suggests that they are images lacking in artistic value or are inherently subcultural. By translating their implicit narratives and visual imagery into socially familiar and tangible art forms, the tattoos become more publicly accessible and offer an enduring archive which can be established within sites of cultural heritage. In this way, the approach stands to challenge social biases and elevate tattoos as images equally worthy of artistic and cultural curiosity as any other art form. My presentation will begin by providing a contextual background that situates tattoos as a universal and culturally meaningful practice across history, and how their cultural and social narrative have developed over time. I will then describe why creative methodologies are justified in approaching this area of inquiry and how they were incorporated to reflexively engage and produce the findings of this research. Before moving on, I would just like to make a gentle note that this presentation contains photographic images of tattooed skin and images of historical mummified remains. These images have been included to provide a visual context, and all study data has been included with the express consent of their respective participants. In order to understand how contemporary tattoos function within society today, it is important to first consider how tattooing has been understood across the historical record. Tattooing is a distinctly human practice, and it emerged independently across geographically disconnected cultures long before any known forms of cross cultural exchange. It is arguably one of the most enduring and widespread forms of bodily expression in human history. This map illustrates archaeological discoveries of preserved ancient tattoos across the world, and I think it reinforces not only the antiquity of tattooing practices, but also the diversity of cultures from which we have gained meaningful insight through their preservation. Through archaeological and anthropological research, we know that tattoos serve many important cultural functions, such as signifying a community identity, a rite of passage, social status, spiritual practice, and a highly personalized means of bodily decoration. In this sense, tattooing may also be considered one of humanity's oldest artistic practices, with each culture developing its own distinctive visual styles and techniques. Like other forms of art and material culture, tattoos offer rich insight into the beliefs, values, and identities of the communities from which they emerged. However, unlike material objects, tattoos exist upon the impermanent surface of the human body, so their survival within the historical record is understandably fragile, and without efforts of preservation, these embodied artworks are quickly lost. The discovery of preserved tattooed remains is relatively rare, and their survival across centuries is often highly circumstantial. In many cases, preservation occurred because the individual held wealth or social status, or because the body was exposed to unique environmental conditions that increased the likelihood of survival. The image on the left is a digital mapping of the tattoos found on the Tyrolean Iceman, currently one of the oldest known examples of preserved tattooing. Based on the placement of these markings, scholars suggest these simple arrangements of lines may have served therapeutic or medicinal purposes for joint pain or spinal injuries. In this way, these tattoos communicated insight into early healing practices, perhaps as a medical intervention or as an embodied approach to pain management. On the right is a highly stylized tattoo discovered in a burial mound in the Altai mountain region. In her analysis of these images, Pankova argues that the iconography was not merely decorative, but deeply connected to indigenous mythological worldviews and beliefs surrounding life, death, and revival. This imagery also appeared across wider Pazyryk material culture, which emphasizes how tattooing existed in dialogue with broader artistic and cultural traditions. When these tattoos are considered alongside other archaeological and anthropological evidence, they offer insight not only into the lives of their individual wearers, but also into the values and visual cultures of the societies in which they existed. Additionally, these examples demonstrate that tattoos are far more than decorative bodily markings. They are culturally embedded artifacts capable of communicating knowledge about identity, spirituality, and social structure across time. and had they not survived, many of these insights may have been permanently lost to history. In the absence of preserved tattooed skin, scholars have often relied upon the material record to understand what some of the world's earliest tattoos may have looked like and why they were inscribed onto the body. For example, Egyptian artifacts depicting female figures marked with dotted patterns or images of deities across their bodies have led scholars to suggest tattoos in ancient Egypt may have been a predominantly female practice associated with femininity or female led occupations. Similarly, sculptures discovered in regions of Japan and Mexico featuring engraved facial markings or intricate black linework have been interpreted as representations of tattooing practices connected to identity, community affiliation, and social status. However, without a broader cultural and narrative context, these material objects remain inherently ambiguous, and it is often difficult to determine whether such markings genuinely represented tattoos or whether they instead depicted body painting or other temporary forms of decoration. I raise these examples to emphasize the significant role that enduring material objects play in preserving and communicating tattoo culture across time. Yet they also demonstrate that material preservation alone is not enough, and without the accompanying narratives, lived experiences, and cultural frameworks that surround these images, our understanding of what these markings meant and why they mattered remains partial and speculative. This becomes particularly relevant when considering contemporary tattoo culture. If future understandings of tattooing are to move beyond surface level interpretation, there is a need not only to preserve tattoo imagery itself, but also its embodied emotional and cultural narratives. It is within this context that creative practice becomes significant within my own research, not simply as a means of visually reproducing tattoos, but as a methodological approach capable of materially and metaphorically preserving the stories, identities, and cultural meanings carried within contemporary tattoo experiences. Having briefly outlined this context, we can see that tattoos have historically held strong connections to cultural identity and community heritage, and arguably they continue to fulfill many of these roles today. However, across centuries of human migration, religious influences, and shifting social values, the cultural narrative surrounding tattoos underwent significant transformation. In many parts of the modern Western world, tattoos became associated with negative stereotypes and social marginality. They were frequently connected to criminality, gang affiliation, deviancy, and alternative subcultures, and as a result, they have often been interpreted through frameworks of social suspicion or exclusion, rather than cultural or artistic value. Over the course of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, these perceptions began to shift significantly. Increased visibility of tattooing within fashion, popular media, celebrity culture, and the rise of digital platforms contributed to the mainstreaming of tattoo practices, which challenged many of the previously attached stereotypes. Although certain biases still persist, they have become increasingly socially accepted across a broad range of demographics and professional environments. At the same time, the contemporary tattoo industry has experienced substantial artistic and technological development, and many tattoo artists are producing highly diverse and artistically skilled imagery, ranging from photorealism, fine line illustration, abstract, and experimental forms. While the aesthetic and decorative appeal of tattoos is highly valued, they continue to hold profound significance in relation to identity formation, well being, and memory. They remain deeply embedded within lived experience and continue to function as they did historically as meaningful cultural markers. When we consider this collectively, tattoos offer insight not only into individual lives, but into broader social attitudes, historical moments, and cultural transformations. In this way, we can understand a society through its tattoos, because the symbols, images, and words inscribed upon the skin reflect what resonated culturally at the moment of their creation, positioning them as a significant form of intangible cultural heritage. I'd now like to return to the methodological framework of this research and outline how a practice based approach offers a means of both exploring and preserving the embodied and intangible meaning of contemporary tattoos. According to Sullivan, practice as research may be understood as a distinct methodological approach in which creative practice functions simultaneously as both a mode of inquiry and a form of knowledge production. Within this framework, the creative work does not merely illustrate research findings, rather, the process of making becomes a way of generating and communicating tacit knowledge, whilst its theoretical, material, and reflective dimensions can be critically contextualized and verbalized. In this sense, practice based research operates through a praxis of being, doing, and thinking through making, enabling forms of understanding that may remain inaccessible through exclusively textual or clinical modes of inquiry. This is particularly significant when exploring tattoo culture, where meaning is often embodied, relational, or difficult to fully articulate through conventional research methods alone. Alongside the creative practice, this study incorporated interviews with tattooed participants and an online survey with tattoo artists in order to gather primary accounts of tattoo imagery and lived experiences. Together, these methods generated material that could be individually analysed and collectively triangulated, supporting an iterative process of reflection, interpretation, and creative response. Through this process, the resulting works responded to contemporary tattoo narratives by engaging the material, tactile, and metaphorical capacities of art practice. The use of metaphor within creative practice therefore becomes a significant methodological tool for enhancing understanding and relatability. As argued by Smith and Dean, artistic practice can function as a physical embodiment of knowledge, offering a visual and material language through which theories, experiences, and ideas may be articulated and relationally understood. Within this research, creative practice therefore functions not simply as representation, but as a critical and interpretive methodology capable of translating tattoo narratives into visual, spatial, and sensory forms which can be explored, interpreted, and archivally preserved as forms of intangible cultural heritage. The first example I would like to introduce is one of a series of prints developed in response to the visual and narrative data from participants whose tattoos related to experiences of maternal identity. Each image within this series reflected a maternal theme, but each communicated a distinctly different lived experience. In this instance, the tattoo incorporates a dandelion seed, a goldfinch, and a magnolia flower, which were meaningful images for the participant that related to themes of loss and transformation. In this example, the tattoo commemorated a sense of changing identity and regeneration following a medical procedure which unfortunately removed the participant's ability to have children, and she wanted to honour this stage of her life through a commemorative tattoo to visually mark the transition. The print was created using multiple layered elements, including illustrative tattoo imagery, gestural mark making, and fragments of the participant's narrative. Through the process of layering, the work aims to generate a sense of visual depth, while the A1 scale of the print seeks to physically reflect the tattoo significance and commemorative value. The colour of this piece also functions intuitively to evoke emotional contexts that may be understood non-verbally. In this case, blue was chosen to reflect the sense of loss, also a calm acceptance described by the participant. Fragments of narrative are also overlaid, partially obscured within the composition, yet they can become visible through closer viewing and physical movement around the work. This was purposely incorporated to reflect both the negotiation involved in reading tattoos and the importance of the wearer's voice and autonomy in defining their meaning. By requiring the viewer to physically navigate the artwork, the print metaphorically enacts the process of seeing things from a different perspective, whilst also paralleling the way tattoos are often perceived within society. Initially understood at surface level, yet capable of revealing deeper personal and cultural significance through sustained engagement. Collectively, this work offers an opportunity to consider tattooing as a cultural practice through which people can make sense of experiences and mark significant moments in their lives. As a series, the artworks become not only representations of personal histories, but also public advocations for mothers, women, and those identifying with maternal experiences within contemporary society. My second example continues this discussion on the material and metaphorical potential of art to communicate meaning through its visual and sensory qualities. In this piece, the tactile and structural properties of clay became a conceptual vehicle to explore contemporary tattoos as a process of physically inscribing memory into the body. As in the previous example, this piece responded to a participant whose tattoo reflected her maternal identity. The unique imagery also signified her affiliation to a local support group for breastfeeding mothers. The tattoo is particularly interesting as it was acquired shortly after the disruption and social isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it not only communicates a sense of maternal experience, but reflects the cultural value of community support during a time when social restrictions and distancing were enforced. To respond to this, the work purposely adopted a shrine-like representation to draw a familiar connection to their associations as sites of celebration and remembrance. In contemporary contexts, shrines are often approached with reverence and care because of their meaningful symbolism, while historical examples are meticulously preserved within museums and cultural heritage institutions. Through these associations, the work attempts to draw a comparison between shrine-like objects and the contemporary tattoo as a visual reliquary within the skin, a site of ritualized remembrance, connection, and reflection. The participant's narrative was intentionally excluded from this piece to draw attention to the inscribed tattooed image itself and encourage the viewer to reflect on its relationship to the surrounding structure. In this way, the ceramic object operates as a metaphorical extension of tattooed skin, a material surface capable of carrying narrative through inscription. By considering the image embodied within the shrine, it may draw associations to public gatherings, celebration, and reverence, which reflects the participant's narrative description of her tattoo as a symbol of affiliation and belonging to a maternal community. Additionally, the physical and enduring structure of ceramics evokes a sense of permanence and protection, which can reinforce the imagery's interpretation. Through its transformation from the human body into a ceramic form, the work recontextualizes tattoo imagery as enduring, ornamental, and reliquary, and in doing so, aims to elevate the tattoo beyond conventional associations by repositioning it as an artifact of historical and cultural value. My final example continues the discussion on the material and symbolic properties inherent to creative practice as a means to embody and communicate contemporary tattoo narratives. The work draws on a participant's tattoo, which she acquired to mark a significant birthday, but also to commemorate a period of transition in her life following challenging experiences of motherhood. For her, the tattoo of a lotus was very meaningful, and she felt a strong connection to its symbolic relationship to growth through adversity. This piece attempts to reflect and communicate these themes of growth, resilience, and transformation through its use of figuration, scale, and floral metaphor. Like the shrine, this piece adopts the familiarity associated to particular ceramic vessels, in this case, a vase-like structure which seeks to reflect a sense of holding or containing. The lower portion of the vase is encased with a stoneware clay which gradually peels back and recedes, which may mirror leaves peeling away from a developing bud. As it transitions into white porcelain, the upper body becomes more exposed and begins to ripple outwards into a form that mimics a flower in bloom. This gradual transition between concealment and emergence aims to reflect the symbolic meaning of the lotus itself, materially enacting themes of growth and renewal. The choice of distinct clay bodies also brings in associations to the purity and delicacy of white porcelain, whilst the stoneware draws on darker, earthier associations. Through this juxtaposition, the work seeks to encourage a dialogue between interior and exterior, while reflecting the participant's narrative, which described feeling vulnerable to new experiences, but wanting to move into a new stage of her life. Through this layering of symbolic, spatial, and material metaphors, this piece seeks to communicate the emotional depth and significance of the tattoo through the familiar and relational form of ceramic and floral objects. The piece extends the meaning of the original tattoo through sculptural metaphor, but also reflects an experience which proposes the importance of self-development and new identity. In this way, there is also cultural insight to the increasing importance of self-agency and the growing pursuit of individuation within a contemporary society. In conclusion, this research has explored how creative practice can function as a methodological and interpretive framework for embodying and preserving contemporary tattoos as forms of intangible cultural heritage. Throughout this project, tattooing has been approached not simply as bodily decoration, but as a deeply relational and culturally meaningful practice through which individuals communicate diverse lived experiences and wider cultural values. The research proposes creative practice as a means to materially and metaphorically translate tattoo narratives into enduring visual and material forms. Through practices of layering, inscription, metaphor, and embodied engagement, the artwork sought not only to represent tattoo imagery, but to communicate the emotional, sensory, and relational dimensions embedded within these lived experiences. Through iterative making, participant narratives, and reflexive material experimentation, the creative practice becomes both a process of interpretation and a mode of knowledge production. Ultimately, this research argues that contemporary tattoos should be recognised as culturally significant artefacts capable of communicating insight into the lived experiences of contemporary culture. By translating these narratives into material objects, creative practice offers the potential not only to preserve tattoo imagery itself, but also the intangible cultural meanings embodied within their visual form. Thank you.